he was doing.
Beanie.
B.
Beanie.
He is a huge fan of the as you
Oh God! Ow, she
Loves the
kicked me in the
theory.
a huge
boob.
fan of the miniseries, which I thought was funny. Yeah.
Ow.
Cece, don't you love when people have like no spatial awareness about where boobs are?
Oh Lord! And like
Lord
People
help.
and dog.
Yeah, she either kicks me straight in the tit or kicks Kyle straight in the dick, and it's just like nowhere else. Whew.
Guys, I have to tell you that when Jeremy and I visited Cece and Kyle, Cece, I tell the story all the time. B has learned that like she's not allowed to jump on people.
Yeah.
But she will do this thing where she like runs at you and she'll like jump on you and jump off before you can tell her not to. She's just gonna bounce off of you with all like 400 pounds of her pure muscle, and it made me so happy.
All right, can I get a really quick level from everybody? Can I just get some like talking, Sophie?
Yes. I am currently drinking eggnog because we're recording Black Christmas, and it's gonna be great.
All right, Adam.
Hello, I have this Beth's Black because it's Black Christmas.
Okay, Cece.
I don't have coffee or alcohol, and I'm
right.
feeling like I need one or the other.
Adam and Cece, can I get both of you guys to bump your mic up? I think we found the best way to do it is actually within Skype settings. There's like a number setting for like volume in there.
Well, is this better? Because my mic was over to the side.
Still, you could still be louder.
Cece, get loud.
We found that last week that like just adjusting the volume knob on it doesn't seem to do much, but if you go to Skype and just dink that number up one, it tends
Oh
to...
yeah, that was on my microphone, I think.
Yeah, because you're like slightly loud now, Sophie, but I'd rather
Do you want me
bring...
to move my mic further back? I put it closer because last week you told me to have it closer to me, but I can put it farther away.
Wherever it is now is fine. Just keep an eye on the chat. I'll let you guys know if it's like weird. We're live. I just pushed the link out to everybody, so.
Sweet.
But I'd rather get our overall volume is really low for some reason. I don't know why, so I'd rather just punch everybody else up.
Cool.
Well, so is that under?
Just Skype settings audio, and then I think I don't know, Sophie, you found it last week. I don't know if you can direct CC. to
Well,
where
I'm
that is.
under audio, video, but then I don't see.
When you go
Well-
to audio video settings, do you have a thing that says like mine says audio microphone, and then it says automatically adjust microphone settings, and below that there's like a 0 to 10 scale?
Yeah, I'm already on 10.
Are
Oh.
you really? Okay, so
Yeah.
try to turn your volume knob up on your mic there a little bit. See if that just like a little bit, and then talk.
How about now?
You sound exactly the same. That's fine. What if can you?
What about now?
You sound pretty the
Now?
same. Do you don't
Now?
have that thing checked? Do you the automatically adjust?
No.
All right. Well, fuck it.
Guys, I think this is my new kink.
Fuck it. We'll do it live. Okay. Can you guys hear this?
Fuck it.
Welcome to Bloody.
I want to get in here. So, as you guys know, we're gonna get right into the review. That's the new thing we're doing. CC, you got a word?
Yes.
Okay. Don't forget that you can't talk over the music. So I'll roll the bumper and then just wait till I stop it, and I'll give you like a visual, like a.
Okay.
I'll give you a cue. All right. Let me just roll Tide here. Did you like that? It's a college football reference.
Oh yeah, I definitely got it.
Roll Tide.
'Cause-
Tell us your
Football.
sport wizardry.
What? Do you guys see that picture of my Christmas gift from work? My boss got me the
No.
peanut butter whiskey.
Can't have it.
What is that?
Yeah, I probably can't either, but I'm gonna have it anyway.
Well, why?
I don't know. He usually gets us wine, which like I'm not really a wine person either, and he just wanted to get a little weird with it this year. So
They were too busy asking whether they could and not whether
yeah,
they should.
exactly. Okay, we're recording. Let's keep it civil tonight. Go to our corners. Shake hands.
I almost spit eggnog out my nose when you said that.
Well,
it's gonna be great.
obviously I think we have like all over the spectrum opinions, but I want to make sure we're trying to find some common ground and not get too crazy. So, all right, we're rolling. If you guys want to mute, don't forget once I start talking to unmute so that you don't start talking on mute. All right, everybody stand by.
to Bloody Good Horror.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final regular show of 2019. My name is Eric. This, of course, is Bloody Good Horror, and we are here to talk about the Black Christmas remake, the 2019 version. There's now 3 Black Christmases, if you're keeping track at home. This has been a totally normal movie release with absolutely no controversy, so this should be a really easy conversation. Everyone is having completely sane conversations about this movie on Twitter. So it should be great. It's going to be great, you guys. This is going to be great. I'll be your host for this evening. Joining me tonight, a fun, abbreviated crew. This must be a first time, I'm sure of it. First up, the High Priestess of Books and Dark Stuff at Bloody Good Horror. Please welcome Cece.
Hello.
From Hotlanta. Sorry, I know last night you were bummed I didn't say that.
It's not very hot today.
Next up on the show from Kansas City. That's in Missouri. Please welcome founding member of the new class, Sophie.
I appreciate that you know where I live, and also that you clarified that I'm on the Missouri side, because Kansas is a mess.
I didn't know any of that. I just got lucky, but here we are.
Well played.
But I wanted to let you know that that information has now made its way into my brain, and it's locked in there tight, so...
Yeah, it's because of barbecue, I'm sure. You're going to just be like, right, Sophie, barbecue, Kansas City, got it.
I 100% just went through like a Michael Scott-esque process in my head to get back to where Kansas City was. But hey, we made it happen. Last up tonight on the show, a new member of the new class. Been on here a bunch of times lately. He is a lawyer. You might call him a space lawyer. He's also Canadian. Please welcome Adam to the show.
Hi, Eric. Just a pleasure to be back. You could say I'm from the Lighthouse, Canada.
Yes, Lighthouse area of Canada. Also,
Yes.
A purveyor / creator of custom horror bow ties, which he's wearing one of tonight.
It's not horror. It's just Santa, unless you're afraid of Christian
Well,
endorsements of paganism.
Well.
So, you know.
I thought
do
you were
you.
saying unless you're afraid of Christian Bale, and I was like, you did not tell me it was a Christian
Yeah.
Bale Santa bow tie.
That would be so much.
Christian Bale, yeah, the most severe Santa
It's a
ever.
lot to unpack here.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, like I said, so this is kind of a weird week at BGH. So we did maybe the first ever BGH biathlon this week, and by we I mean me and Cece. Where last night we
Yes.
did the Year Ender, which is going to air next week, and tonight we're doing Black Christmas, which, like I said, is our last regular show of the year, and that's going to air this week. So we wanted to try to get this one in before the end of the year, and here we are. So thank you guys for joining me. I think we're going to do it. Let's get right into it here. Let's take a quick break so that we can discuss Black Christmas.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV. From the prime time. Main feature.
Cece,
Yes.
let's talk.
What's up?
We've been exploring the last few weeks the college writings of one Mr. John Schnars. It
Yes.
really pains me that people listening to this show haven't heard the next show because I can't refer back to it, which is a real bummer. Do we have
Yeah.
any college writings of yours to look forward to?
I definitely do not think that they will be on the same level as John's. If you are into reading about, female bodies as monstrous or, Lilith or Eve or the, hermetic Christian symbolisms of early pagans. Sure.
I think Sophie's pretty into it.
Light reading.
I may have already read that paper and am also making my boyfriend read it.
Oh,
So.
that's adorable and so so I love it. Very
Yes,
nice, very
so
nice,
support-
guys.
And actually, Adam has also read it.
I have. I don't have a boyfriend. I'm sad now.
Wow, the listen,
I'll take all the support I can get. It's okay.
Cece, I'm not gonna read it, but I support you. Is that enough?
It's not that long. It's only
Eric,
like
it's very short, and there are a lot of pictures, so I feel like you could do it. And like most of the pictures, it's just like you got boobs and weird
Ah.
salamander ladies, and
Yeah. Look, you got weird feet for feet fetish. You got titties.
Okay,
You got, you
I-
know, all
say
kinds
no
of
more.
stuff.
Say no more. Send it along.
You certainly are.
Eric's like, you
Weird
had me at
and
feet.
titties.
drop it in the Google Drive. Let's do this. All right. All of this is to say that you know words. You put them in order to write articles sometimes, and sometimes you just take a singular word that describes that night's movie. So with that said, please bring us the word of the day.
So the word of the day is monogamy, which is actually, I don't know where it comes from. I'm sure mono is the prefix that is like what, Latin, and then I don't know about the rest of it. But it's interesting and related to this movie.
I bet Adam does. Adam knows a
because-
bunch of Latin.
Yeah. You want to jump in there?
In,
Oh,
ex-
do we have to?
in
No,
extremis.
please explain.
It's related to the movie because it is in reference to the situation where an ant colony is established at a single nest site within a larger colony. So you have multiple sorority houses on Sorority Row in this movie. And they often, in the movie, they see themselves as ants because they are part of a larger colony of female sisters.
Aren't we all just ants if you think about it? Just, insignificant, just.
I don't know. I mean, ants are pretty impressive. So,
Yeah. Okay.
They're strong. They
Yes.
stick together. If you kill one, there's more of them. I don't remember the speech, but I got
know.
that was pretty much it.
That was pretty much
That's
it.
very close.
Also, legit ants can pick up what, 10 times their own
Yeah,
body weight or something,
true.
which
I
is
have.
just wild.
I have heard
I
that.
wish I could deadlift like an ant can.
Right? That would be amazing.
You can also
And it
light.
doesn't look like
Squat.
they have to use their knees. They just use their arms and throw that up.
You can also light them on fire with a magnifying glass, which when I was a kid I thought was kind of cool.
What? Why?
This
I
is where the
didn't go
metaphor
through that
ends.
phase.
Yes. I do not recommend the metaphor continuing. But also,
Suit
just as
yourself.
ants, why would you burn those?
Because I was like 11, I like to burn things. I don't know.
I mean, my brother for sure did that.
Yeah,
Also.
burning things is cool as
Yeah.
shit. That's all I'm gonna say. Thank you for that, Cece. That is the wonderful Bloody Good Horror word of the day, brought to you tonight by Cece. Next up, Adam. Here we are. This is Black Christmas. Can you tell me? I didn't actually tell you to prepare for this part, so I can do it if not. But can you tell me who made this movie, who's putting it out, and then what's it about?
Oh, I can. So it's this is a Blumhouse film. This is
It's a
the
Blumpy.
oh, sorry.
It's a Blumpy.
Yeah, that's gross, but sure. And this is the third feature film of Sophie Takal, I believe. I haven't heard it
Sophia.
pronounced. Sophia Takal. My apologies. And April Wolf co-wrote, and this is, I believe, as far as I've seen, the first time that those two have worked together. Yeah, this is a fantastic new movie from the Blumhouse, the place that tells you that there are no female directors. So
Well, they gave you one.
They found one.
they gave you one.
Yeah, listen.
found one.
Listen. Putting his money where his mouth is, I guess.
True. So, I'm going to synopsize the film now. The film begins at a sorority located at Duke University. Oh, sorry, Hawthorne College.
Now, too much snow to be due.
So, Hawthorne College has multiple sororities, and in the beginning, it's Zeta Delta. And a sorority sister receives a creepy text message from the school's founder and then is killed by a robed assailant. We then meet Riley, played by Imogen Poots, a sexual assault survivor who, after a performance at a fraternity that calls out her rapist, receives the same harassing text messages. As more women are killed on campus, Riley and her sisters must unravel the college's hidden conspiracy and fight back against the killers. The rest of the movie was completely spoiled by the trailers. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you. I gotta say, I do like it when you try to people try to amble through it without actually looking it up. But I respect the attempted accuracy there. So there we go. All right, guys. So let's do the round table, and then we can get into it here. Cece,
Yes.
Black Christmas. You a fan of either of the other ones briefly, and then what'd you think of this? Not that it matters. I mean, they're all like three literally completely different movies, but.
Oh, sure. I just haven't seen the first two.
Oh, okay. That's actually no, I love that because that's a different viewpoint on all this. So
Yeah, sure. I definitely know I need to watch the first one. I've heard I can skip the second one. And for this one, I was excited because, I just really appreciate a good horror movie at Christmas. And, I was really stoked that we were getting a Black Christmas written and directed by women. So I was pretty stoked about it coming out. And I mean, I can't really compare it to the other ones, but, I think that there's definitely things that could be, I don't know, as a plot, there's things that I definitely would change a little bit, but overall, I really liked this movie, and I think that the interpretation that was taken is really obviously topical and very, I don't know, it incites a lot of discourse and discussion, which I'm always here for. So I liked it.
I'm so tired of discourse, you guys. I'm so tired. Just exhausted.
Well, I understand that. But,
discourse is hard. It's not easy.
Do what?
Discourse is hard. It's not easy.
It is. And, you got to put in the work
Yep.
to get anything out of it. So I'm really excited to kind of talk about it because I was on Sophie's podcast on Monday. So I'm on a real rager of podcasts this week.
Oh, wow. Three in a week. That's incredible.
Yeah. So, there's a couple of articles and a couple of interviews that she and I brought up. So I'm excited to talk about it and really, kind of see the different interpretations.
All right, beautiful. Sophie, you've been waiting so long. What did you think of this movie?
So I should say off the top that I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of the original Black Christmas. So my sister and I watched it together at Christmas time. I think maybe 2 years ago. We just were home visiting parents. It was the day after Christmas and we wanted to watch something scary, and it happened to be something that we could watch on demand for free. And I'd always heard that it's a very foundational and important slasher movie. And I was blown away by it. I mean, we sort of started watching it oh yeah, this is going to be a silly, campy slasher movie from the 70s.
It's so old. It's so
yeah.
old that when you go into it, you're just not sure it's going to hold up. You're like, okay, I'll see what I can get out of this,
Well, and I think because of how old it is, when it initially sort of broaches topics like abortion, you worry that they're going to fuck it up, and then they do it really well. I mean, the fact that a movie from 1974 has a protagonist who is pregnant and wants to have an abortion, has decided she's having an abortion, and her boyfriend does not have a say in it because that's what's the right choice for her. And she's that conversation is not done hatefully. It's just this is not your choice.
Yeah. And certainly was in the air.
Frankly, mind-blowing.
Certainly was in the air in the country, but when you compare it to other media of the time, it very much stands out. You just weren't seeing it. Yeah.
For sure.
Roe v.
So
Wade was 1973.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, this is very fresh.
As it was happening.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, when you put it in that
and I can't emphasize enough that the way her storyline around the abortion is not minimized or flattened out in any way. I think because of the fact that this occurred so close to Roe v. Wade, it could have very easily been this stupid, selfish woman wants an abortion. She didn't even think about it. And that's not, I mean, that's how her boyfriend
Sophie.
feels,
Oh
but
my
we're not
goodness.
supposed to
Sophie.
empathize with him. So that movie is great. We immediately afterwards watched the 2006 remake, which is hot garbage. And like, I'm a huge X-Files fan, and it's written and directed by Glenn Morgan, so like
Oh.
I wanted it to be fun. It has a lot of actresses that I really love. And I think Glenn Morgan is amazing. Unfortunately, I think that what you get in the 2006 Black Christmas is like a weird amalgamation of a lot of different X-Files plots smushed into like a very subpar, gory mid-2000s slasher. And all of it is just bad. Like, I couldn't name a single thing about that movie that I like, except the actresses in it, but their characters are terrible. So you could like skip that one altogether. So I went into this movie sort of, I watched the original for the fourth or fifth time right before going to see the new one, and went into it with very limited expectations because I had heard very mixed things. I have some friends who were like, this is bad, and some who felt lukewarm, and some who loved it. So I tried to go in as a pretty blank slate. And I came out really, really loving this movie. I know that as we talk, we're going to sort of discuss some of the potential weaknesses from a genre standpoint. I think that conversation is one that is potentially worth having, but I'm going to be honest up front with like where I'm coming from is that this movie on an emotional level worked so incredibly well. And just from a movie standpoint, I had a blast watching this movie. So I really enjoyed it.
Mr. Adam. By the way, I want to point out that I love having a lawyer on the show who can be like, oh, yeah, Roe v. Wade, that was a 1973 Supreme Court case. That was great.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna get into defamation. And we can talk about that. So, but yeah, I have written a review that you can find on Bloody Good Horror. I might change a few things about my review if I could redo it right now, but I kind of stick with my general interpretation that I consider this film around a 5, maybe a 5.5. I think that in terms of an important message, I think this is a movie that you should support with your dollars so that more movies that deal with the subject matter can come forward. I think in terms of, whether this is a movie I'm going to rewatch frequently, I don't know. In comparison to the previous Black Christmas, 1974, as Sophie touched upon, it is fantastic. It was the first movie to have the trope where the killer's inside the house. It is one of the best shot movies, and I think in terms of like proto slashers, and I've seen this in a few articles, the 1974 version didn't have to follow the conventions of the final girl or the conventions of, the exact same plot that you get in all slasher movies. So I do think that that is a real boon to this movie, that you have a movie that doesn't kind of follow the traditional, there's one final girl, everybody else is picked off for their indiscretions and punished. I do like that about the film. I really like, obviously, the message, and I think Imogen Poots does a very good job with the material. I don't think she was given great material to deal with. Some of it does feel realistic for the time. Some of it feels a little like flipping through current headlines. We can get to one of the lines that I thought was literally just they wanted to be coy, and that's fine. I think that's good in writing, but it did feel a little weird for certain characters. And overall, I think that some of the supernatural plot doesn't work for me, but I think we can talk about why. And I think the reason it doesn't work for me is it kind of abdicates some people's responsibility, but I can see it read in a different way where it's actually about institutionalization of misogyny and patriarchal values. So that would be my quick rundown. I think it's a movie that you should see. I don't think it's necessarily the movie that we all wanted, and that's my opinion.
Oh, I like that. Is that your tagline? And that's my opinion.
No, I'm not like a weird pundit.
I'm Adam, and that's my opinion. That could be your YouTube sign off. I love it. Anyway, man, I saw this movie. It's now Wednesday. I saw this movie Saturday. Um, I don't even know where to start with this thing because there's so much going on. I will say, I will maybe just start with this that just so people know, Sophie and I have been having therapy sessions together this week. We've been working through some things together. Look, I mean, like Sophie, you know, I greatly respect your opinion. I love having your voice in the show, and so I felt very differently about this movie, so I wanted to make sure I reached out to you this so we could kind of like understand where each other was coming from. So we didn't like come into the show and have like a prom night revisited kind of situation. As fun as it was to fight with Schnars at the time, just sort of like not where I am right now. Normally, like when I don't like something like this, I'll start out with what I like, segue into what I don't like, but I'm like in my head, I'm thinking that maybe that kind of sets then the broader discussion up like more negatively than necessary. So I'm gonna kind of flip it and just say like so I'm gonna say what I like after I get through what I'm about to say, which
Well,
is
I mean, let me just back up because real quick, like I think that part of having a conversation about movies in general and about anything is that if you don't like something, like you're allowed to like something or dislike something, and that doesn't make you a horrible person. And I don't think that
yeah,
anyone reads
no,
into
no,
that as like,
100%.
you know,
I will admit fully to like probably spending too much time on Twitter. I'm not sure of any of you guys like who spends a lot of time on Twitter, but I think what was going on with this movie pre-release was like
sure.
kind of batty in that it got picked up as a cause for sort of like
Yeah.
4chan men's rights trolls who hadn't seen the
Of
Would
course.
movie.
you say that this movie sort of, not to the same degree, but I think like in some ways the discourse around this movie before it came out especially was not entirely dissimilar to the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot,
Oh yeah, no,
which I
of
also
course,
have a lot of feelings
of
about.
course, no,
Charlie's
yeah,
Angels 2019 also.
it was
Yeah,
actually very,
right.
it was actually very similar. I mean, if anything, like not as insane because I think this movie appeals to like just naturally being a niche genre thing. It appeals to less people than apparently Ghostbusters, which is apparently everyone's favorite movie. I don't want
Well,
to. I'm
and
not
we
going to
should be
relitigate it.
very clear that like the Ghostbusters thing was more toxic because like women aren't allowed to be Ghostbusters because ghosts will smell their periods and they wouldn't be affected. So like
Well, but
this movie
so
like Black Christmas was always about
yes,
like
agreed.
a man stalking women, so I feel like that like if
But
it had been flipped that might have caused a similar but
I don't even want to dig into the internet stuff too much because I feel like it's gonna like maybe get us
Right.
off the rails of the movie. But I bring it up
Let's
because of like what
keep going.
what Cece said, and I think the point that it brings up for me is that where my headspace was going into this is I saw people, all these people have not seen this movie. Let's start with this. I see people on one side being like MRA trolls, right? And then I see people on the other side being, I think, understandably defensive, and then championing a movie that they haven't seen, which in some ways is a little crazy. Although certainly I understand wanting to champion female creators and champion something with a message like this, even if you haven't seen it. But what it does for somebody like me, who's kind of like, I'm a genre fan. I am I am into this latest slate of like socially conscious horror films, right? I saw the trailer. I mean, if you've heard me on the show, I saw the trailer and liked it and defended the trailer. Even some other, I think like some of the other people, like I think Joe and John maybe didn't like the trailer. Like just, and John isn't even on Twitter, so if Schnars, who knows what the fuck's good? Like he doesn't know what's happening. He just saw the trailer and thought, it looks like a throwaway slasher or whatever. I like the trailer. I think Blumhouse makes great trailers, but it set this thing up in my mind where like I was scared to watch this movie because I'm like, no matter which side I come down on, I'm gonna like put myself on one side and then be like, I don't know, whatever. Again, I just think like Twitter poisons discourse, which is my larger thing I'm coming to lately. But anyway, that was why I was nervous. I certainly don't really think that anybody in this show is gonna like put me over like the skewers for not liking this movie. But we did also record a show last night, and I'm a little mentally drained, so I was like maybe a little wary going in. But whatever. Like to move on from all that, I think it's great that Blumhouse. It's a really interesting thing of like Blumhouse said a pretty dumb thing about not being able to find women filmmakers, and even if there are less women filmmakers, like there's reasons for that, right? And so like we have to change the system in order to bring up more women filmmakers and get them the experience they need to then go out and make movies like this, right? regardless of what you think about he said, I think it's a positive thing. Like whether it was because he was being pressured or not, like he did it. He found he found a female creative team, gave them money, and from what I understand, basically was like, here's Black Christmas. If you can write me anything set at Christmas that we can call Black Christmas, like go to town. And that's pretty cool, and I can certainly support that, even in with what I ultimately think of the movie, which is that I don't think this is a good movie. I didn't enjoy it while I was watching it. I think that it lacks a lot of the movie things that I'd like to see accompany the message stuff. I do have some positives, which I'll kind of like end with, so we can kind of get into the discussion. But especially, I just saw Black Christmas as well because the last drive-in did a Christmas marathon on Friday and played the Black Christmas, and I hadn't seen it in years. I've been wanting to revisit it forever. Sophie, I had the same reaction you did to like revisiting it. Was that your first time seeing it, Sophie?
This week?
Yeah.
No, no,
Or
no.
just
I
revisiting
watched
it.
it for the first time with my sister a couple years ago, and
Okay.
I've watched it probably like 4 times.
Yeah,
since
and
then.
like I was really blown away by how like stylistic it is and how well drawn the story is and how it's like a really unsettling, creepy movie.
Yeah. Well,
The-
and again, if we're talking about like a movie in the era that it came out, like
kind of
most
kind
of
of
the
mind
cast
blowing.
is women, and they are for the most part pretty fleshed out characters,
Yeah.
and some of them are downright unlikable, but they're still sort of all allowed to be
Who they are.
fleshed out women
Yeah.
who have sex
Fleshed
and
out.
just
Yeah.
function as like real people in college.
Margot
You know?
Margot Kidder, real saucy in that movie.
Oh my gosh, Margot Kidder. We were telling Cece, like, you got to watch this movie because there's a scene where Margot Kidder is drunk and she's feeding alcohol to a small child
Oh
and then
yeah.
turns to a man in his 80s and is like, look at this little kid. He's hammered. It's
Yeah.
horrible.
She's good. She's really good. But anyway, so
She's so good.
I didn't like this movie. It falls really visually flat for me. I kept coming back to, and actually we had an email later that kind of made the same comparison. It feels kind of like a weird post-90s Scream slasher type of film, except not in like a nostalgic way that I might be into. Like it kind of almost like falls into some of the kind of like bad tropes that those movies did. Yeah, like I said, like visually flat. I didn't find it very suspenseful. There's a lot of things that feel really cheap. Like it's obvious they can only afford to fake snow like a 3-house block because every walking scene is in front of the same 3 goddamn houses. Like, and that stuff's small.
Let's be clear that they filmed this. They like the production of this movie was such that they went from the concept to releasing it in less than a year. So I think
Yeah,
they
and
were
like, look, like that.
okay, we're gonna have to not. They
Right.
filmed it in New Zealand because it was the only place that would even be able to hold fake snow.
So first of all, that makes sense. Second of all,
Yeah.
maybe that's a problem. Like, and maybe that's on Blumhouse for trying to like rush this thing into theaters. You know what I mean? Like, because I think that can potentially lead to some of the other problems. Like, I don't think the script is very polished. I will say that, like, I felt like, especially in the first act, I felt literally like, and this was the first thing that came to my mind, I felt like I was being read Huffington Post articles on like feminism, like in the sense of a lot of this stuff, instead of being really worked into the story and the characters, it's like we've got these kind of like campaigning college students who are just they're not even in some scenes having conversations, they're like talking at each other, because you can tell they kind of just like, there's a lot they want to bite off in this movie, and I think that they maybe bite off too much, because the thing I really liked, and probably my favorite thing about the entire movie, is Imogen Poots, just as an actress. Like, she's kind of amazing. I mean, I think she is doing more with what, in my opinion, is like some pretty weak dialogue in this movie than like, I don't know what other actress that I can think of at that age range could do this. Like, she's so expressive. She is adding a lot of subtlety to the, her character is a lot about wrestling with trauma and PTSD of being sexually assaulted and like dealing with trying to kind of get her voice back. Like, a lot of weird ways this movie echoes The Nightingale, which sounds insane because The Nightingale is such a different thing, but like really the characters are kind of this specific character is grappling with a lot of the same things that the female lead is in Nightingale, in the sense of she's been assaulted, she's trying to survive in this world, which like in this case is not 1820s Australian outback where you're literally trying to survive, right? But she's trying to survive in college where she is confronted with rape culture every day. And in some scenes, quite specifically, confronted with her attacker, who a lot of people seem to believe over her. That to me, like that thread with Poots's character, uh, her dealing with the trauma, a lot of these really subtle scenes, like there's a scene early on where she sees him for the first time that we're seeing her see him, and she freezes. Those little moments where they're using like the subtlety of the storytelling to portray a character dealing with that kind of trauma. That's when this movie's really strong. A lot of the bad dialogue, honestly, I think comes from the friend character, who's like the kind of like crusader on campus, and she's the one getting the petition against Elway's, Carrie Elway's hilariously stupid professor character that I might get to in a second here. Um, like I feel like that's where they forced in a lot of the extra issue stuff they wanted to talk about, and they got really pointed with the issues, where I think they could have told like actually like a much more powerful story. I also just think like the tone is kind of crazy. Like, and I've heard people describe this as campy, and I think the problem with that for me is that the style is so flat that I don't read it as like, if you're trying to intentional camp, I would prefer that you're signaling that to me, because if you're not, then I'm either thinking this is unintentional camp, which is not a good thing most of the time, right? Or I'm thinking that I'm supposed to be taking this seriously, and like when I'm watching a movie on sexual assault, I'm immediately going like, I should be taking this seriously. But there's a lot of things in this movie that are like straight up silly, and I think this Carrie Elway's character is a great example of that. Like, he's literally like, if you you wanted to write a sexist professor character, but you made him as a Bond villain. Like, he's so clearly
Right, but like, have you listened? And I say this with, have you listened to Jordan Peterson talk?
no, okay, but like there's like some really, there's one specific scene. There's a lot of scenes. Like, I think this
Okay.
I love Carrie Elways. I'm like maybe one of the world's biggest Princess Bride fans. I actually think he's great in Saw. I love this kind of like late era Carrie Elways where he gets to play these kind of older, darker characters. But like, I think he gives the worst performance of his career in this movie. He is, and I think a lot of it has to do with the what he's given to work with. But I think the microcosm of it is this scene where he bumps into Imogen Poots, and like in this hilarious Scooby Doo way, like his secret plan kind of spills out of his folder, and he's like, "Oh, geez, sorry," and he like scoops it all up, and then he goes,
You mean that doesn't happen to you on a daily basis?
like the friend comes up, right? Because the friend of Imogen Poots, she is circulating a petition to get Carrie Elways fired, and she comes up, and he like he just kind of like under his breath goes, "Boy, she really won't stop till she gets equality, huh?" And then he looks at her and goes, "Oh, you weren't supposed to hear. I'm so sorry." Like it's so silly, and I think like that scene is repeated. That type of non-gracefulness is repeated a lot in the movie, and I think we'll talk about the director saying in interviews like, "Oh, it's unsubtle times. I didn't want to make a subtle movie." I think that would be fine, except there's other examples of unsubtle movies that it's not subtle versus unsubtle as much as I feel like the word I keep coming back to is like graceful, or maybe clever is like more the word I'm thinking of. Like, my ultimate problem with this movie is I don't think it's entertaining as a movie. I think it's like cheap feeling. I think it's not suspenseful. I think it doesn't know if it wants to be funny or not. If it didn't want to be funny, then it's a much worse movie than I actually am giving it credit for. If it is trying to be kind of campy and funny, then I think maybe I just wasn't getting that vibe. But I just feel like the movie that kept coming to me is Assassination Nation, dealing with a lot of the same issues, but that movie is like visually stunning. It's also really funny, really intense, like all these emotions that I want from a movie. Like, I'm happy to watch a movie with a message, but I also just want it to be a good movie. For me, like, the movie's got to come first, because I think when the movie is really good, I think the message becomes more potent. It's like the movie being really good is what opens the viewer up to the message, in my opinion. And what I think happens in Black Christmas is a lot of the message just being kind of hitting you over the head without the movie. Because when a movie's really good, it puts you in a like raw emotional state, and then the message like sinks in more. That's kind of always how I feel, and that's what I feel like a movie like Assassination Nation does. So I just didn't feel like this achieved that for me.
So I just really quickly, because I know that Adam brought it up over email, and because I want to be clear about this. I think like for me, Eric, I hear what you're saying about Carrie Elwes's character, but like if you listen to, and Jordan Peterson's not the only example, but I think he's like a very potent example. Like if you listen to him talk, he's a person that has a massive following both locally at the school where he teaches and internationally, who says absurd bullshit that you'd be like, oh, I feel like if the stuff he said was written as movie dialogue, you'd be like, nobody would ever say this. But like I mean, as far as like women being, basically women only existing to be subjugated to men, and like the way that social order works. And so for me, like Carrie Elwes's character as Dr. Gelson really works, because a lot of what he's saying is almost word for word stuff that Jordan Peterson says on a regular basis that people like just eat up.
Well, and I also feel
silly.
like I think that a lot of the dialogue, I can totally understand where you're coming from. Like parts of it did feel a little too choppy, or a little too like, like, haha, did you hear what I'm saying? Like I said this because this is so topical. And like I get that, and I completely think that like it kind of jarred me out of the plot of the movie. But also there's so many things that like even the crappiest, like lamest quote unquote joke, like I've totally heard people say stuff like that to me before, and on campus, at work, like anywhere, and I'm just like, do you hear yourself? Like it's just so strange that you're like, this can't be real, and it is. So like I get that, yes, it's kind of weird, and like I would have written it a different way, but I mean, I didn't think that it took away that much from it, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of like, sorry, Adam, I kind of like Cece's point that like sometimes for me, Eric, I can totally see where you're coming from. There were lines of this that, and again, like I loved this movie. I redid my top 10 to include this movie, but I understand that there were pieces of dialogue that felt like a little too cute or just kind of unbelievable. But I really love Cece's point, because this is kind of how I felt watching it, where sometimes, and I mean, this might be totally experience based, but I feel like as a woman, sometimes people, especially straight men, say stuff to you that's like, I can't even believe this is happening right now.
Right.
And like that's what a lot of that stuff felt like to me. And if I may offer an example, my sister saw this movie with a guy that she's seeing, whose response to this movie was like, I don't like it because all the bad guys look like me. Which feels like a thing that like you should have enough self-awareness to be like, right, maybe I should unpack this and not just say it out loud. But like people, the patriarchy is real and dangerous, and people say dumb shit on the regular.
Well,
Sure.
I just like I have to say that like there's a point in the movie where somebody like thinks they're being really clever, and they're like, your body, your choice. And I'm like, you know what? I would laugh at how ridiculous that was if I actually haven't heard that verbatim in a situation that it doesn't relate at all to. And I'm just like, what? Did you feel the need to say that? Because like,
Well, yeah, I mean, I do. Yeah, that's the thing, is I do think it has these like, there's like a handful of little moments like that that really work for me, that I think are then surrounded by some of this other stuff that's like a little wonky. You know what I mean?
oh
And
yeah,
like
mean,
I feel
think
like
that, like,
it's not even a long movie, but I feel like
no.
there's a through line that could have been shaved down to a little bit, that might have made things maybe because it's like, it's a very small movie that obviously had a really small budget. It's not just the like three houses thing. You know, like I really could have done with a scene with more than like 10 college kids in it. Like we're at a college, we never really get a sense of, and you could have done this with without having a ton of resource, right? Like I would love to have gotten a little bit about how the larger college feels about Carrie Out Waste, right? Like maybe the college is like a liberal institution that understands their point but doesn't, but also annoyed by her, right? Like, I feel like there could have been other things done to show a little more scope, right? And then because to me it just ends up kind of feeling like a cheap small movie, but there are these like little threads. Like to me, the most weirdly enough, one of the most resonating scenes for me is when her friend is missing and she goes to the security guard and she's like, my friend is missing. And there's like, it's a really simple scene. It's not over the top dialogue like a lot of the stuff I'm describing. And he just doesn't believe her. Like, or not that he doesn't believe her, but he kind of just doesn't want to be bothered. And he thinks she's kind of like being hysterical, and he tries to like brush her off. Like,
Well, and there's a beautiful moment in that scene where like she starts crying because he's not listening to her, and the second she starts crying, he shuts down and is
Yeah.
like, "This is not a
Yeah.
real thing.
and like
You're being ridiculous. Just go
Yeah.
home and like come back if you don't hear from her by the end of winter break."
that kind of thing. And like, just so you guys kind of understand where I'm coming from, like, I obviously, like, Adam and I, not women, and I can certainly appreciate how certain things, certain messages will kind of like resonate with you guys differently than us. From my perspective, like, I have two daughters, and I think about this a lot because if you look at the news the last couple of years, right, and you look at things like the sort of scandals that are coming out with like U.S. gymnastics and lots of like sporting programs that like young women are involved in, right, and like when you have abuse issues in there, the number one thing that always comes out is they're like, believe girls when they tell you things, right? Like, and so that is so much always in the back of my mind, especially like watching my daughters grow up. That's why the scene resonated with me, because that's the thing that people are always saying. Like, people don't believe girls, and that's how things get out of control, because even when they try to warn you early, it's like nobody's listening to them. But what I love about this scene is it's giving me this information through a something happening in the plot, as opposed to like a character kind of lecturing to me, which honestly, like, I'm going to be honest, a lot of this movie to me feels like I'm being lectured at, whereas this movie was like this moment was a really strong real world example of what they're trying to say. And to me, that illustrates like this patriarchy thing so much better, because where the patriarchy is like most insidious, I would guess, are these, like you guys are saying, these everyday interactions that people don't see.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think I think that I think that I'm trying to like, I don't want it to come across as sounding I don't know, I guess it's just a hot take coming your way, everyone's way. I think that this essentially is a movie written by women, directed by women, for women, and I think that a lot of it's not going to resonate with a lot of straight male viewers. Like, I think that it, like, regardless of, you know, I'm not saying that it's a perfect movie. I definitely think that like there's things that I would really appreciate like having changed, but I think that like the smallness of the movie and like you seeing these repetitive scenes and these repetitive conversations and all of this talk, like, that's something that is very, very familiar to women. And I think that like it's very stereotypical that like women always talk, like we're always talking about this, like this is, you know, like girls just chatting about crap. And I think a lot of that is illustrated in this movie to make a point, like, yes, I would have liked some more action, but it's also trying to represent like how small your world feels. B agrees with me. That's why she's barking. How small your world feels when you're in a situation like being at an institution where you're away from home. Like, it's, you know, like we hear multiple conversations about how there's an orphan's dinner, how these girls are kind of on their own, that they've created this family for themselves of their friends. So their whole world revolves around talking to them and connecting with them. So you see the same, you know, scenarios over and over again. And it becomes like, I think it's really interesting that it feels like, and I only say this, I'm not trying to say it as a negative to you, Eric, but like, it's interesting that you say it feels like it's lecturing to you, because like that kind of makes it kind of reiterates that like girls see it as like just talking about it, but it comes across as like this nagging or this like, you won't let this go.
I didn't say nagging.
No,
Um,
but
I
I
but
get
listen, like
that.
The idea of it feeling lecture. Yeah.
no, but
Yeah,
listen, yeah, no, I totally understand where you're coming from. It's also to me just like a preference with my movies in general.
No, I
Like
get it. I
about
mean,
any subject, I would like I always call it the George the you know the Lucas prequel disease, where like
yeah.
you're telling me more than you're showing me. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, but no, of course, like I fully understand. I think this
Well,
movie's gonna hit different for different
and
people.
to talk about the parts that I don't like, I mean, I wholly support there was too much talking in it. I mean, I look, I if I'm gonna see a slasher movie, like I want to see blood, I want to see gore, I want to see like
Yeah,
these intense kills,
the
and we don't
PG-13.
get
Yeah.
that. I mean, granted, yeah, once I like halfway through the movie, I was like, oh, this is
Well, so
PG-13.
that
This
so let yeah, and I want to talk about just kind of straight movie stuff a little more before we kind of roll into the finale. But like, it is interesting because I don't PG-13 doesn't really bother me. I mean, like, Happy Death Day was PG-13. This is the one I
yeah,
always bring up. That Happy Death Day is awesome, and not only is it awesome, but it's like pretty violent. But
yeah,
I have the feeling
You
I have a feeling that Happy Death Day was shot that way to begin with, whereas unfortunately, like, and maybe you know too much, right? Because we all knew that it was rated R and then chopped down. But unfortunately, I think it feels that way. When you shoot it that way and then you cut it down, I think it tends to feel different, right? Because
yeah.
something's being extracted and you didn't have the chance the first time to think how to make this look cool without the blood going, right?
you
Which
have
can I
to
just
go.
say?
Sorry,
Oh, I'm sorry. No, no, no.
please.
I just wanted to say that like the blood in the movie, I really think was cleverly done. Like the like paranormal aspect of this movie is a little weird and wonky, and like yeah, the metaphor is a little far. It's a little bit of a reach, but I appreciate that for a PG-13 movie that they used black blood, and like this whole time the only time that you see blood get splattered it's like all over them, and then come to find out like it's this black goop, and I was like, oh,
It's
I
interesting.
liked
The
that
first
stylistic
kill,
choice.
the first
Yeah.
kill is actually pretty bloody, and I have a feeling like that was
Mhm.
their one MPA. Like, all right, we're gonna leave this
Yeah.
one in, and then we'll
Yeah.
cut the rest. Because the first one,
And
you
then
actually,
turn all that blood black.
yeah, there's like, but the first one's like there's an icicle stab, and there's
Mhm.
actual blood coming out, and I was like, oh, okay, and then none of that for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Adam, what do you got to say, buddy?
I was just going to say, if we look at the Carrie Elwes character, I think he was best at the beginning of the movie and in little parts where he was threatening, but he was threatening in the sense of being an institution. So he was scary when he was saying things like, "Oh, well, I don't include any women on my curriculum, but here's an example of a woman writer who agrees with me." Or he was
Right.
scary when he threatened. You made this call out song, which we haven't talked about and is fantastic, and it was written
Mhm.
by Ricky Lindholm from Garfunkel Oates.
Yeah.
And I was so
Nice.
glad because they were going to do like a parody of like Baby It's Cold Outside, and I'm like, that's hack. I don't want that. So I was so glad they did something creative with it.
That scene
But
was
Nice.
so off-putting. It was like the actual once the song gets going and you understand where it's going, you're like, oh, that's kind of pretty clever. And I think the way that is probably one of the better shot scenes in the movie.
Yep.
But like before that scene, I was so distracted because I'm like, these girls that I'm this whole first act of this movie are just like these feminist like warriors, right? Well, why would I don't the whole premise that anyone thought they would be getting up on stage in those outfits singing that song is kind of weird to me. Like the rest of the room was like, yeah, they're gonna sing us this song. You know what I mean? Like that whole part felt weird. And then I saw where it was going, and I'm like, oh, this is what I would expect these characters to be doing. You know what I mean? It was just it
Yeah.
was an interesting scene.
I thought they were hinting at it throughout. They were like, we've been planning this for a long time. The other sorority pulled out, which actually led to one of the characters' deaths. So I thought there was some creative writing stuff in there. I thought that, like, yeah, as I was saying, the Carrie Elwes character is scariest when he says something like, yeah, you should probably take down that video because we'll sue you for defamation. And I wanted to talk about that because that's an actual concern that a lot of people have when they report that they have been sexually assaulted,
Sure.
and then
Yeah.
they get sued by their alleged attacker. Now, they are usually protected because under a case called Sullivan that dealt with Southern segregationists that used to sue people in libel to stop them from like publishing what they were doing in terms of segregation. So
Hmm.
they would come out, make a law that would be segregating black people in the States, and then they would go, well, lawsuit if you publish this. And the other party wouldn't have enough money to pay to stop that suit. So the
yeah.
Supreme Court of the United States basically blocked that practice, and it benefits sexual assault survivors because they have a defense of A, truth, and B, it's up to the other side to prove on a balance of probabilities, which is more likely than not that the sexual assault didn't occur, which is really hard to prove. The issue is you're bankrupting people
Right.
and you're putting them through the emotional turmoil of going into a court case, which is the same issue that you have in sexual assault trials. So I liked those parts. I liked, things like the cop not going into the house because he didn't really have any grounds, and that kind of touches on whether or not officers, like whether or not you can go to the police and say, this happened to me, and if they have enough evidence to go ahead with the prosecution. That stuff is great. The stuff that I
thought you were about to let us have a really long butt.
But
No, I think the movie does a great job with a lot of those things. I almost feel like, and I don't want to put this on Blumhouse, it's kind of unfair to make this a slasher movie. It almost needs to be a socially conscious Get Out style movie where the horror is,
yes.
for example, women being kidnapped and being forced to do things, or something where it isn't just and now they're killing them.
I think this should be.
Yes.
I think this should be a much more serious movie. I 100% agree. I think that especially and in a minute here we can kind of roll into it, but like the finale. Here's what I'll say about the finale. Like there's a supernatural thing that goes on in the third act, and while our conversations over email have definitely made me understand and appreciate more of the allegorical stuff going on, I still think when you're sitting there watching it, it's like hella silly to watch. And I think for me, like undercuts the seriousness of like the subject matter. And it's like part of it is the costuming. Like these dudes look like they went to Party City and just bought the most generic ass like killer costume they could have found.
But to be clear, like I think that's on purpose. I think it's supposed to be like, dude, listen, Eric, I don't
like.
I was in a
fraternities do
sorority
that.
in college,
Yeah,
and
for
I
real.
feel like the idea that like a bunch of frat bros went to Party City and bought velvet, like hooded gowns is like, yeah, of course they did.
I just think, but
that's
like
very accurate
to
me.
Adam's point, I just think that the human stuff going on in this movie is so much scarier than any of their slasher bullshit. That's kind of my point, I guess. And then when they get even crazier with the supernatural thing, I'm just like, what are we like trying to do here? Like I understand the allegories, but I just feel like when I'm watching it, I'm just like, fucking what? Like I was going through this whole thing hoping it was gonna kind of reel me back in by the finale, and instead it just takes like a hard left turn. And I also think that just from a movie standpoint, like once multiple killers start showing up, it kills all the tension for me, because then it's just like it almost becomes like a slapstick kind of thing where like they're all just showing up and then they're like showing up, stab, showing up, and it's like I also think again like this is where the lack of visual flair kind of hurts this movie, because a lot of these fight scenes kind of like are a little cheap. I think that she saves a lot of that maybe for like this slow motion lady stab fest that happens like in the third act, which I can definitely.
Which I'll say I was not happy with. It did
Interesting.
not satisfy.
Okay, go into it.
Well, I mean, just if I mean, I guess at this point, if you've seen the movie, you know, and if you haven't, maybe go watch the
we can
movie before
just
you
say
listen to the.
we can say spoilers.
Do what?
We can say spoilers.
Let's
Okay,
lay
well-
the spoiler down. We're
So-
going into it.
So I mean, the climax of the movie is that all of the additional sororities who are being hunted end up at the fraternity house, and Imogen Poots, the main character, she's there, so they all come to like kind of like help rescue her, and they have this huge brawl with all of the fraternity brothers, and they like destroy the bust, which is like the source of this, you know, paranormal possession that's happening. And you know, there's a lot of there's a lot of like minuscule moments that happen within the scene that I can appreciate. And I'm like, okay, I like that there was a lot of thought put into it, but at the same time, like, I really wanted it to go off the rails. Like, I thought that, like, okay, you gave me this whole movie where it's just a little bit, and I thought that you're saving up all your blood and gore and splatter for this, like, just like, I thought it was going to be like Hatchet level, like buckets of blood.
There's
I didn't do that.
Yeah, it's like, but there's elements of the script that are over the top, but it doesn't really go there in a way that you'd love it to. That a movie like Assassination Nation like goes full bore. Now, I again, like, to find out this was made in less than a year, it's obvious how low the budget is. Like, there's obviously constraints happening here that I think probably or definitely would like limit the kind of visual things you can do. It, would limit the amount of time you have to hone the script and stuff like that. So I think like you certainly have to take that into account. I will say there's like a big character turn in the third act, and I say big, but when I was in the theater, I went, "Who? Fucking who?" And thank God. Like, it's funny because I hate when movies handhold you. Like, our like go-to is always The Perfect Getaway. Because, like, The Perfect Getaway is a super twisty... I don't know if you guys remember this thing. It was, like, these two couples on vacation. Crazy twisty movie. The end it's one of the most bananas-ass twists I've ever seen. And it's, like, easy enough to figure out. And they show you, like, a 10-minute flat. They show you literally every single thing. But it's a long... It also kind of cheats because it shows you things that you didn't see. But I had absolutely no idea who this character was. Like, I guess I maybe would have figured it out. But thank God, like, 10 seconds later... They give you the full on, like, they've desaturated the film just to let you know we're in a flashback, and it's like blah 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, hair girl, like, okay,
did
all
they
right.
just
Helena? Her name was Helena.
Helena. She had a necklace that said it.
Guys, she had a super distinctive hairline. I don't know why anyone was confused.
I never got confused.
Honestly,
I knew it was Helena.
I don't know, but even if
she had beautiful hair.
But even if you're not confused, like, I actually like once we discussed the allegorical kind of, which I definitely, while watching it, was like, okay, I get this. This is kind of about like fake allies or women kind of turning on women or women not supporting women. But like, she's a super minor character. She's in like 2 scenes before that. I think it would have been a lot more to me. I mean, they definitely try to give her this little emotional connection to the main character. But I think if you had made her more part of this main friend group, like, I think it would have been a lot more impactful, like, when it happened. That's just my opinion. It's kind of interesting how much a lot of the third act pins on that.
I want to hear Sophie on the third act, and then I have a point about the hand holding and what really actually bothered me about it.
Beautiful. I have so many thoughts.
What actually happened?
No. Do you guys think I'm a monster? What have I done?
Is Adam kind of bow tie turning into like blood and baby intestines? What's happening? Okay, so it's really interesting because I think when I saw this movie, I sort of had the reaction that I think everyone else had, which is, so when the turn happens at the end, what we learn is that once the bust of the college's founder got moved into this frat house, it was the fraternity he belonged to when he was in college. They discovered that the bust has like weird supernatural powers, and they're able to like basically possess and indoctrinate new pledges with the weird black goop that comes out of the bust, and that makes them into like super strong monsters. So a couple things. One thing that's super important to remember is that, like, Brian, whatever his fucking face is, who raped Imogen Poots' character, Huntley, didn't have the goop. He just already was a terrible piece of shit. Like, a lot of the dudes that we interact with, any of the men from that fraternity who we interact with and we know who they are, were already bad garbage humans before this happened, so that's important. But I definitely, like, I had the same kind of, like, reaction initially that was like, oh, well, if we're going to make it supernatural, then it excuses their behavior. And after getting out of the movie and sort of thinking about this movie in an extended amount of detail, how I have come to feel about it is, I think it's not going to shock anyone to understand that, like, the black goop and the bust sort of represent the patriarchal system as a whole. And I think that plot device sort of helps to explain how guys that were already shit and this just makes them worse. And even guys that are good, that are like genuinely nice people who appear to be allies, who want to be helpful, are not outside of the seduction of this goop. And we talked about this a little bit on the podcast that I recorded with Cece earlier in the week, but I love the fact, so Landon, who is like set up as a love interest for Riley's character, is black. He's the only black fraternity guy we see in the whole movie. And the guy, and he's not in this fraternity. They don't offer him the creepy, weird ritual goop until they think he's going to like join forces with another marginalized party to threaten their power. And then they're like, oh, we will let you be a part of our group if you don't join with the women. Like, I love the idea that it's like, yes, like black men generally we want to subjugate you, but like if you're gonna like join forces with women, then we'd rather have you be on our side so that you can't be a part of this. So I ended up really enjoying the turn that the last act takes, and I know that we talked about this quite a bit over email, but April Wolf and Sophia Takal kind of go out of their way to subvert the final girl trope, where like Imogen Poots is set up to be our final girl, but she can't defeat this like horrible insidious force by herself. It's not until she is with all of the other women, whether they're in her sorority or not, that they're able to take it down. And I really appreciate the idea that even when they're all together, like they individually cannot defeat the individual men they are fighting until the bust gets smashed, which I think is like phenomenal and great and beautiful. I have other thoughts, but I'm running out of bandwidth, so I need a break. But yeah, like I said this earlier, but I think this is a movie that I discussed this over email. Like, I think Us is a perfect movie, and I think this movie is not without its flaws, but it has not, before this movie, it had not been since Us that I saw a movie that I continued to think about and read about and talk about as much as I have this movie. So I've really, really appreciated sort of the layers upon layers of stuff that are going on.
Okay.
And I agree. Those are very good points, especially
I
I
got
really
nothing
like
else.
the element on Landon. I will say Us has a similar issue, which is the very long flashback at the end of Us that explains to the audience everything that they should have been paying attention to.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem. Like, if I really boiled it down, the one problem I really have with this movie is they thought that we were really stupid. Because every scene where something that's going to be relevant happens, they say very clearly. At the beginning of the movie, a character says she lost her vibrator, and I was like, no, you didn't. Somebody stole that. That's never happened. That's just, and if it has happened, you should be concerned. You should be concerned that someone took it.
Happened. I'm not saying I'm not concerned. I'm just saying it's happened.
So lost vibrator, and then lost diva cup, and then a character mentions in a scene, hey, do you see a connection between this lost diva cup and the lost vibrator? And then later there is like several other of these lost things, and then there's like the most upsetting was just you have a character, they're saying this person owns slaves in the north, so we don't like the founder, but then in a voiceover scene, our character Chris, who is the friend of Imogen, that is the outspoken like person that's her friend, says he was into all this black magic stuff, and I'm like, okay, well that's the plot then, thanks. Like, no one would ever say it doesn't mean anything to the movie outside of that sentence.
100%.
So I knew the ending
when you
by the beginning of the movie.
To your friends, you don't say, "Oh, she's into black magic and shit."
That is literally how I introduced Cece to everyone.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yes. Never mind.
But I'm not
That's
in a
good point.
movie. Like I would, if it turns out that I suddenly got tortured because I was insulting art,
now.
Oh, it was Cece.
It
But
was.
because I'm not in a movie, but because I was in a movie, I was like, they're really hanging on that lady's chain that says her name. That's weird.
All I think
And then-
that's probably a good place to wrap it up here. Lost vibrators.
Hold on. Sophie did want to make one little point about all the visual connections to the original.
Guys, I had so many notes. I'm gonna run through it so quickly, but can I just say that, like, as someone who because I know there will be people listening to this who are like, well, she loves the new one because she doesn't get the old one, and I'm here to tell you you're wrong. But like, I just like
So
from
defensive.
the jump, it is so clear that that Sophia Takal and April Wolf very deeply love and respect the original movie, and I think they, in my opinion, walk a beautiful line of sort of like paying homage and doing fan service to the original without like being super over the top. I mean, they've both said in interviews that they wanted this to not be so much a plot remake of the original, but to feel how the original felt, which I personally think they succeeded in. But a couple really great things that I caught that I loved. So like we get a couple kills that are similar. We get someone being strangled with Christmas lights, and we get the killer being suffocated with a dry cleaning bag, which was dope as hell. You get the like creepy weird phone call that turns out is just like bad reception on the cell, which was great. You have the cat. There's one of my favorite shots in the entire movie that maybe doesn't work for everyone is like once the girl who lost her diva cup gets killed and they don't know that she is dead in the house. Imogen Poots is walking out the door and the shot is from inside the window and it pans back and her dead body
Yeah.
is on the porch like the bodies in the attic in the original.
I wish they
But
did. I
my
honestly wish they did more than
favorite-
that. I wish they did more of that because that recurring visual in the first movie is so strong, and I was like, okay, cool. Like I think it's okay to crib stuff like that when it's that effective.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I think part of it is that like in the original you have the killer is storing all the bodies in the attic, right? But like in which I think is a super effective visual, but April Wolf and Sophia Takal really intentionally like did not want a high female body count because they didn't want to like female bodies are super disposable in horror and they didn't want to perpetuate that. So I think when we talk about the like the lower body count, I agree that we could have had a lot more like satisfying insane kills of the bad guys. But the choice to not have more sorority sisters be killed, especially not on screen, was on purpose. And so I think that's why we don't get the like body count accruing like on this weird porch. But my favorite, and then I'll let us wrap, is like at the very beginning, this girl is walking home from the library, and that was one of the most effective scenes for me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure this resonates more with women than dudes, but like her just like walking back to her car from the library, which is like a super safe thing to do, and just all of a sudden realizing how alone she is a really terrifying thing. And
Sophie, I would
text
like
that
to
she gets-
I would like to put in a word for short people everywhere that I have 100% walked with my keys in my hand like that before.
But I love that the first text that she gets is an emoji of a pig and a cat, which are the two like weird animal noises that the killer makes on the phone in the original.
Yeah, I thought that was probably
And
from
so
that.
they like make a new reason to explain why he would send that, but like I thought that was
Yeah.
that from that moment I was like, I'm in this movie.
I mean,
is-
honestly,
is
I
so-
will say the best scare in the movie, like the movie I just don't think is scary at all. The best scene though is the thing that they ripped from Exorcist 3. Let's call it homaged, obviously. But I'm almost like it made me think of like this is a really weird comparison, which is kind of my thing, but it made me think of Cabin Fever because if you listen to interviews with Eli Roth, he's like, when I look back in that movie, like I was a young filmmaker and I just had all these things I loved that I wanted to like get in there. So like, here's my Texas Chainsaw shot and here's my this shot. Like I almost wish they did more of that because like it's a good scare. It's a dope ass scare. I would be okay if that Exorcist 3 thing is like in every movie.
Did you guys catch the Cece already knows the answer, so she can't say this, but did you Adam and Eric, did you catch the like very, very on point homage to Your Next? Because I literally
Like with
almost fell out of my theater
Like
seat.
with
I was
the
so
arrows?
excited. Yeah, well, it's not just the arrows. So I just rewatched Your Next like a month ago, and the fact that the arrow coming out of nowhere is what jumps things off, but it's not just that. It's that then like the video speed goes way, way down, and we get this like thrumming bass line as they're like helping their friend who got grazed out of frame is like almost shot for shot the same as Your Next, which I was super
I
excited
thought
about.
that was I picked up on it. I was more at that time focused on the fact that two people dropped their phone.
Right? How would you have your phone? You've got
Your
straps
hand
on
and
him
you-
now.
You're gonna drop it, but that's why you should have a pop socket or like a ring or something.
Pop
Look at
socket.
this.
That's why Adam Fingers is gone? What was this? You're just like,
No, 2 phones, and technically 3, because 3 characters didn't have a phone. I was literally talking to a 911 operator today, and she was like, "You have a landline, so they can find your house. You don't have a cell phone. This is how you die."
All right,
Okay.
guys, we have to wrap here. I'm sleepy. What did you ultimate final take on this movie? Would you recommend it, Cece?
Sure.
Adam?
I would say you should definitely see it.
Sophie?
yes, see it, and please see it in the theater, if for no other reason than we should support movies like this existing in the future.
That's true. Sure, in the theaters.
Yeah, man, I wrestled a lot with how to approach kind of reviewing this movie, obviously, and the ultimate conclusion I came to is that like all I can do is just be brutally honest because I trust that our audience knows me enough to know that like I'm coming from a good place or at least trying to. At the end of the day, I think this is a bad movie that comes from a good place, and I can't really recommend watching it. I also think that like, and this is the part that really like I just thought so much about this week. If you showed me this movie and I didn't know who directed it, and especially if there was less messaging to it, I think it's almost unwatchable. If you take those things, like I think maybe that's like unfair, but like I would have been much harsher on this if you had just presented it to me, didn't without any of this backstory about Blumhouse or hey, we're like supporting female filmmakers. Like I am giving this movie more benefit of the doubt in some ways because I do appreciate that angle of it. But at the end of the day, for me, that angle is like off screen. It's not the movie itself, even though obviously the messaging is there. So I just can't recommend it. I think it's a pretty bad movie that is obviously hampered by budget and apparently time constraints. So, I think these things happen. But certainly I think it's a great thing that Blumhouse is working with more female filmmakers. And like I said, like it's the only way we're going to get more amazing movies from female creators if we keep giving them chances. You know what I mean? And so like from that perspective, certainly I think it's a good thing. But I will be the dissenter and say no. I'm sorry, Sophie.
And really quickly, if you have not watched Sophia Takal's other feature film, Always Shine, please watch it. It's on Shudder, I think.
I think so. I highly recommend it.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
All right, guys, it's going to do it. The Great Black Christmas Saga of 2019. It's finally over. Let's take a quick break and do some fan mail.
Some people have expressed outrage.
Is that Santa's reindeer?
Over a Christmas movie that is this violent, this disturbing, and this raw. Our answer is, you haven't seen anything yet. Black Christmas. Rated R. Everywhere Christmas Day.
This is Jake Busey. You're listening to the Bloody Good Horror Podcast.
Send feedback to info@bloodygoodhorror.com or on Twitter using hashtag AskBGH. Join Patreon to get back episodes and much more. Patreon.com/bloodygoodhorror.
And we're back. info@bloodygoodhorror.com is the email address. Before we get to that, just a little bit of housekeeping. Adam, I hear you have some stuff on bloodygoodhorror.com. Would you like to talk about it? Some new stuff.
Yes, he's on the new episode of Something Red.
Oh, that's right.
Yes, I'm on the new episode of Something Red. I have an article on Black Christmas currently. And if you wanted to pick up Grimm Magazine, a fantastic magazine, I wrote an article and so did Cece. Mine's about toxic masculinity, and The Lighthouse Cece did one on ectoplasm, and I'm trying to remember the other one because I read it really quickly.
Finally, only 2 years later, the symbolism of Father's Day from the holiday anthology. The long-awaited.
Oh God, Father's Day, so good. That's the one where she gets the tape.
Yeah.
One of the best things I've ever seen, I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I'm very proud of my article, so read it, please.
Wait a second. Wait, I'm sorry. I was trying to like sort through fan mail. You wrote the article?
Yeah, I wrote the article about the symbolism of that.
Okay, we're canceling the rest of the show. I'm going there right now.
Yes, it's not out yet. I'll send it to you,
Shit.
though.
Okay. Send me the booby college thing first.
Okay, the college thing. Kitties and weird
That's what
feet.
That's what he remembered.
Yeah. I mean,
Patriarchy,
granted,
am I
do
right?
talk about her-
Sophie, you're straight up muted, which I'm kind of loving because you look so passionate right now.
Eric, can you videotape when you see the boobs in this painting? Because, like, that's all I want.
Sure. Yeah. I'll give you a play-by-play.
Great.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, Something Red, you can check that out on the Patreon podcast feed. That's Cece's book podcast. You can also get Cinema Fromage on there. That's Casey's show. And Behold an Electric Terror, Sophie, is now back in his house.
Oh, it sure is. I'm halfway through watching The Stand for the first time so that we can record an episode about it tomorrow.
Do you like it?
And I'm having I hate it.
Oh, interesting. I've heard it's
Thanks,
so
I hate it.
it's so beloved.
It's really hard to watch in 2019
Is
if
it-
I can be
Is
totally
it? I mean, like
honest.
some of that older King stuff certainly is slightly problematic at times.
I thought you said
It
that
doesn't
older
make it-
kink stuff.
I mean, he also that like Stephen King had some weird kinks going on in the
The
90s.
feed stuff, not good.
But yeah, we're doing things. We discussed the Shining miniseries, which I actually really enjoyed, and then we talked about Langoliers, which I also hated, but it was a fun
Oh.
episode. So
So let's talk about it because the Langoliers is like
testicles with teeth.
a childhood favorite of mine. It is awful. I'm not arguing that this movie is good, but for whatever reason, I used to rent it all the time because you could get like it was on a double VHS from like this mom and pop video shop that I used to go to. I 100% remember being in high school and making one of my girlfriends watch this, and she somehow didn't break up with me, which is amazing.
No. Oh, Eric, no.
I always thought there was something really cool. I kind of want to read the story because I always thought there was something really neat about that idea of like, hey, we all fell asleep on a plane and just woke up and everyone who was awake died. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
You making a girlfriend watch that is almost as bad as my dear friend who recently went on a first date to see The Lighthouse.
That's great. I don't know. I think that
Kyle would still argue that Faces of Death was the worst first date.
Oh yeah, I mean yes.
I don't know. My parents' first date was Deliverance, so.
Ooh,
That's also harsh.
But
Why
yeah,
do you take someone on a first date to a movie?
that was the '70s, man. I don't know.
My first
Hello,
date was
make
your
out in the back
World
row.
War Z,
On the
and
first
it was
date,
for-
Cece, come on.
I like talking to people.
2019.
Okay, I can't unpack what Cece's talking about right now. But what I would like to say, is that if you're a fan of like bad movie performances, you cannot live the rest of your life without seeing Bronson Pinchot in The Langoliers.
He just like tears paper in the
he's
sweatiest way possible.
He's sweating and like coked out and screaming at the top of his lungs. It's beautiful. It's
about
so good.
scaring a little girl. It's a lot. It's a lot. You guys should listen to the episode. It'll come out later this week.
I wonder if it's streaming. And is it streaming somewhere? I'd love to revisit it if I'm being honest.
The Langoliers?
Yeah.
It's on YouTube or Daily Motion or one of those things that's totally fine.
Oh man, if I could find the Langoliers on YouTube with 90s commercials, that might be my holy grail.
I watched the entire Shining miniseries with 90s commercials, and I saw Jim Gaffigan in a Saturn commercial, and it just warmed my damn heart.
That's
I
awesome.
remember that. Yeah.
That's great.
Good episode.
I love that. Other things going on at bloodygoodhorror.com. Luke, our boy Luke, he is, I think, inarguably the most prolific reviewer at Bloody Good Horror. He has Daniel Isn't Real, which I hear is pretty good, and also a movie called Bliss. There's a brand new column to the website, Primal Scream. Okay, so this is Natalie. Natalie's a longtime listener. She's a patron of BGH who, through our Slack community, has become a writer. Wink, wink to people out there who might want to become writers. She is also a licensed clinical psychologist, and she's going to be exploring depictions of mental health in horror movies. So
Awesome. I'm so excited for that.
it's
Me
gonna,
too.
so the series is kicking off with some of our favorite 2019 horror movies, Midsummer and Us. So there you go, bloodygoodhorror.com.
I used my privilege to read it, and the Midsummer one is very good.
Very nice.
Yeah, I used my privilege to read it. I love it.
Adam,
If I can make a BGH adjacent plug, I did this last week, but my sister and I are starting a podcast, which is still not available because iTunes hates us and it's taking some time. But maybe by the time this episode comes out, we'll have an episode available.
all right.
It's called 28 Days Later, and Cece was just on to discuss this Black Christmas remake in relation to the original one.
I will
So.
never not giggle when you say that. It's pretty good. I
It's
like
a
it.
pretty great name.
Nice.
Also, I don't know if you knew this, Eric, but 28 days is the typical number of days in a menstrual cycle, so it just like works on all levels.
I'm familiar.
That's what I
Listen,
thought the joke was. Yeah.
listen.
Yeah.
I knew what a Diva Cup was when they mentioned it in this movie. Okay, all right.
Guys,
I know
dear
things.
friend of the show, Andrew, texted me to ask what Diva Cups were and if they were new.
What?
And it
Listen.
was, I should pull up a spot like that.
Can I be
I
honest?
really
He
love the
also
idea.
doesn't have a sister.
Can I be
Right.
honest?
Right.
Can I be honest? I've
I-
only learned this in the last 6 months, but I did learn it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just love the idea that like this movie made men understand what
Yeah.
Diva Cups are. Like, listen.
No, wait a
this is
minute.
not
Wait a
to
minute. Wait a minute.
Discredit you two.
Sophie, if you don't know what it is, I'm not sure this scene helps you totally suss it out.
I mean,
You'll
that's
figure it out. It's for period stuff.
Like
Eric,
you
I had a
figure
friend
out
in college who,
where it
like, as a
goes.
freshman, asked me very sincerely, and this gentleman had a mother and a sister his age. If didn't women only have their periods once a year? So
Oh, that
wish.
I'm
sounds
just
great.
saying,
Jesus.
even if all you do is leave the movie being like, "What's a Diva Cup?" I should Google it. That's a
Sophie,
good thing.
Sophie, sex
That's
education.
actually Mrs. Claus.
Sophie,
Go
sex
home and Google Diva Cups, guys.
sex
What?
education is another thing we don't have time to unpack here in the
The
last show of
tagline for
2019.
this
Yeah, I
episode is
know.
Google Diva Cup.
Google
Diva
Diva Cups.
Hashtag Google Diva Cup.
Yeah, man, they come right out hot out of the gate in Black Christmas with that reference. Like
That
first,
made me
first
very
30
happy.
seconds. We
Wait,
did.
also, okay, wait. This might not be podcast appropriate. Cece, what Imogen Poots gave to her? Was it a pad or a tampon?
It had to have been a tampon. Or, no,
Because
a
like,
pad.
putting a
It
tampon
got-
in dry standing up sounds okay, thank you. I was like, nobody would ever do that. Wasn't
Yeah.
happening.
No, she gave her a Diva Cup. It was unopened.
No, Eric. That's not how Diva Cups work.
She gave
No,
her a
I thought
pad.
she gave her like a new one that like wasn't.
Wait, it was a pad? No, a new Diva Cup comes in like a box and it has like a little drawstring bag. It's like sterile and whatever. Like, you don't discard them. You keep it over and over and over again.
Well, maybe you have a backup. I don't know.
You don't.
Well, that seems like
And
bad
even
preparation.
if you did, it wouldn't be in like tissue paper in your drawer. It would be like in a box.
Did you learn nothing from Girl Scouts? Didn't they teach you to be prepared?
Wow. So what I learned from this is that like if it was a pad, I don't understand how she put it on that easily with her pants on. And if it was a tampon, like sit down, your life will be easier.
Okay, we can move on.
I just think that's an important Eric, it's another important thing for listeners of the
I mean,
podcast to be
Eric,
aware.
hashtag get a daughter.
Yeah.
Me and my
Uh,
girlfriend that I saw it with laughed really hard at that scene. So regardless of what it was, I was just like, I'm impressed.
Yeah, we
so
knew
it's
we knew
okay.
where they were going with it, regardless
Yeah.
of what it is. We did get one email tonight. It's from our buddy Robel. It's kind of long and it's about Black Christmas, like stuff. Like literally, we covered everything in his email. So I will just say, no, sir, he didn't like it. That was his review of this movie. info@bloodygoodhorror.com is the email address. I'm gonna do tweets this week. First up from Jody. Jody's another wonderful BGH patron. He says, a PG-13 rating doesn't automatically mean a horror movie is bad. What are your favorite PG-13 horror movies? Happy Death Day is one of mine.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
Ooh,
would say that's
Urban
one of my
Legends.
favorite.
Urban Legends. Yep. I
What?
mean,
Urban Legend.
I mean, shit. In the '80s, there were a lot of insane movies that were like PG before PG-13 was invented.
Also, Scream. Scream is PG-13. No, or is it R?
No, Screams. I'm pretty sure Screams are.
I think it's R.
Rats.
The opening kill scene in Scream
Oh,
alone would get you
yeah.
an R rating. I feel like. Yeah, it's R. This horror flick.
Insidious. I don't
Yeah.
like it.
I
but
bet.
that's
I bet.
one.
I would. I mean, I wouldn't know for sure, but I bet a lot of those are PG-13. Although I seem to remember.
Oh,
I
I
seem-
liked the OG Conjuring a lot, and that's PG-13.
I actually seem to remember some of them though getting R ratings for quote unquote pervasive scariness, which is always funny.
And for titties,
Well,
Titties and feet.
yeah, but no, the supernatural movies aren't usually trafficking and that kind of stuff.
The ring.
supernatural titties,
There's boobs in the ring.
ghost boobies.
I'm saying The Ring is a really good PG-13, I believe.
Nope.
Well,
Nope. We're only talking
listen.
about supernatural titties.
You
now.
have to
Are you
specify.
talking about Gore Verbinski's The Ring?
I was talking about Ringu.
Okay, good.
I think the remake's better.
Hot take, I hate Gore Verbinski's version
Really?
of that movie.
Really?
The Woman in Black made my top 25, and I love that movie.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best horror movies.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing
obviously of the decade because it made my list.
with
but
supernatural
it's not straight-
movies. Like with supernatural movies, if they're done well, and like my annoyance with supernatural movies, well documented. But if they're done well, like you don't need to do any of the things that get you an R rating, if you're doing a supernatural movie well. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not necessary in a lot of ways. So I think a lot of those probably qualify. But he brings up Happy Death Day too, which is like maybe. I mean, the amazing thing about Happy Death Day is how it's threading the needle because it is a slasher and it's actually pretty violent and still, I think partially because of how light the tone is, it managed to kind of sneak through the PG-13. So it can be done for sure. Chris, you can cast original Black Christmas Margot Kidder in any 2019 horror film. Which one do you choose?
The Lighthouse.
How about Midsummer?
Wait, what did you say, Eric?
How about Midsummer? Just like every,
Who was
but
that
like
her play?
no, she's a new character, right? She's a part of the
She's
cult.
still Barb?
It becomes kind of a wacky comedy because like she's like a fish out of water. Like she's a part of the cult, and she just allowed them to indoctrinate her. But she's not like anybody else. Like she's not nice like all of them, and nice quote unquote.
Right.
That's
The
what-
answer is like Ready or Not or Tigers Are Not
oh my
Afraid.
God,
What-
yeah,
like-
dude, Ready or Not?
I mean,
Yes.
I thought the answer is not Tiger is Not Afraid. I already forgot my answer, but I thought it was hilarious.
Tigers Are Not Afraid. Yeah, maybe that one doesn't work.
Yep.
Guys.
Climax. We did it, guys.
Oh my God. Yeah, she might fit in there too.
Yeah,
She-
for sure she would fit in there. Although Barb didn't strike me as a dancer, to be totally honest.
It's really interesting. Like, so if you happen to tune into the last drive-in this last week when Joe Bob did Black Christmas, like he talked a lot about Margot Kidder, and apparently she hated horror and thought very little of it, and would for years, if anybody brought up the Amityville Horror, and was like, "Oh man, that was a piece of shit, wasn't it?" Which actually I kind of agree with her on that one, but there's my hot take for the night. Hashtag Ask BGH. That's how you can hit us up on Twitter. That's gonna do it, guys. This is the last movie review from Bloody Good Horror in 2019. Next week, of course, you're gonna hear our year in review episode, which we've already recorded, so it's in the can. And then the week after that, we're gonna do. It's gonna be a first in Bloody Good Horror history. We're actually gonna unvault some Bloody Good Horror classics from behind the Patreon wall, so to speak. I keep going back and forth. I think I'm just going to keep it a secret. I think if you've been watching the live feeds, you've maybe heard me say what it's going to be, but we picked out the show. I will say this, it's from circa like 2014. And interestingly enough, it's actually the show that we did, like we had just launched Patreon. So it's kind of interesting to hear little baby BGHers kind of talking about this Patreon adventure and not really knowing like where it was going to go, especially because it ended up being this driving force keeping us going and helping us improve the show constantly. So, just a shout out to everybody that's helped us kind of keep this train going. But so I think it's going to be fun. New listeners, if you've never experienced some of these old shows, I think you're going to have fun with it. And of course, like more of that stuff is if you sign up for Patreon at some levels, you can get access to that. And I think it'll be fun for long-time listeners to kind of revisit this stuff as well. So, yeah. I listened to the whole episode. I didn't have to cut anything offensive out, so I was pretty excited by that because it was 2014. Like, I feel like you never know what you're getting into when you delve back, you know?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. You know how offensive Sophie can be.
Totally.
Literally always.
Sophie, what did you tell me your boss refers to you as that you
Oh
wanted?
Lord!
You wanted
So
me
I
to
texted
add
Eric,
into your
I had
intro?
dinner or had coffee with my boss like last week, and he said this. My boss and I are very close, and he said this as a total compliment. But I was like, I feel like Eric especially would appreciate this description. My boss described me as insufferably honest.
I mean, of all the things to be insufferable about, I appreciate that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say sufferably honest.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We love it.
Well,
Yeah.
Adam, that's just because of how delightful you are. Like, don't get on my bad side.
Oh shit.
Adam's like, oh man, the connection here in Canada is bad.
I've seen it. I've seen it. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, Eric, you haven't seen anything, my dear.
Well, then I'm scared.
But baby, you ain't seen nothing yet.
I love
Sorry,
that we
Joe
got
wasn't-
I know. I really appreciate that you picked up Joe's slack here.
All right, guys, that's gonna do it. 2019 in the books. We hope everybody has a safe, happy holiday season. Enjoy your new year, and
I hope the safe word.
Cece's not even drinking wine tonight, guys.
I've been on 3 podcasts this week.
Cece does not know where she is right now.
Cracking up. As I was saying, I hope everyone has a happy, healthy, safe holiday. And yeah, BGH come back at you in 2019. We have a lot of stuff, changes, good changes, new things coming down the pipeline, exciting stuff. So we hope you stick around and experience it with us. So that's going to do it. It's our review of Black Christmas. That's the end of 2019. Hope you enjoy the show as always, and we will talk to you very soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.